alternative approach to the issue of whether or not we are free is the philosophical response of libertarians. Libertarians take the completely opposing response to determinists and claim that we are, in fact, free beings. Libertarians, like hard determinists, are incompatibilist. They claim that the concept of determinism cannot be claimed at the same time as the idea of free will. The two approaches are in complete contrast to each other. The libertarian states that we are free to choose our own actions, and thus we are morally responsible for our actions. Libertarians believe in free will, and Hume defines this as the power of acting or not acting according to the determination of the will. What this means is that we are not forced or compelled to act, but we do not act in a random fashion either. If either of these things were true, then we could not be considered to be free. Instead, our actions come from ourselves alone. They are a result of the choices of our own moral character. In this way, the moral actions of a person are not set out in advance. The future is not decided for us. Libertarians present a range of evidence for this belief. The biggest part of this evidence is based upon our own personal experience. We all have a sense of making moral decisions. When faced with a dilemma, such as whether to tell the truth or a lie, we will be conscious of weighing up the evidence and deliberating about what to do. We might have mixed feelings and also feel we could equally choose either. When we make a decision, we might immediately regret it and wish we'd chosen differently. We might even attempt to change our decision. We perceive ourselves as free agents. I feel free. This is the most significantly overwhelming evidence for our autonomy, our sense of freedom. If we reject this evidence, we risk descending into complete skepticism, as we would have to reject all other evidence based on personal experience, including the evidence for determinism itself. We would be unable to trust any evidence at all brought to us by experience. In addition, libertarians point out that determinists confuse the difference between different types of truth. Determinists see that some of our actions are caused and claim that it is a necessary truth that we are caused and cannot be free. A necessary truth is one which cannot not be the case. It has to be true. The determinist claims then that it cannot be the case that we are free in the face of the evidence for causation. Thus, we must be mistaken, deluded or hallucinating when we experience making a free choice. However, the libertarian shows that in fact it is a contingent truth, one which may or may not be the case. In this instance, it may be the truth that our actions are caused, but equally it may not be. In fact, our experience of freely choosing is evidence that this is exactly what we are doing. Libertarians differ over the extent to which we are free to act. The liberty of spontaneity says that there are some limits upon a person's freedom, because our personality or upbringing limits us to some extent. Our genes make us limited in some ways as well, but we are still free to choose, because whilst we are limited to some extent by these things, we are still free to choose what to do, and can resist some of these tendencies to some extent. The liberty of indifference says that a person is not bound by limits like upbringing and society or by our genes. This is real freedom, whereby we are completely free and nothing constrains us at all. The libertarian distinguishes between our personality and our moral self. They could argue that our personality is caused. This is the part of us that is caused or at least affected by things extrinsic to us. The personality is formed through our experiences and our upbringing, whereas our moral self is different. This is the part of us that can override these. This part of us will decide over our own self-interest, or will resist the temptation to do something that they really want to do. This part of us chooses freely, independent of our conditioning. This is why a person might act contrary to their upbringing and surprise people who expected them to behave differently. The personality might be trained to tell a lie in order to protect their own interest. The moral self might resist that temptation and decide to tell the truth because they feel it is the right thing to do. They choose this action freely. The implication of this for our moral responsibility is that if libertarianism is true, then punishment makes sense. We can be considered to have moral responsibility, and thus we can be praised or blamed for the actions that we choose. It means that we could have acted differently and resisted temptation and chosen differently. We are not constrained by events outside of ourselves. All our actions come from within ourselves, and thus the only people who can be held responsible for our actions is ourselves. For religious belief, there are some obvious positive implications. Firstly, it makes sense now for God to praise us or blame us for our behaviour, and so heaven and hell make sense. There is now a reasonable answer to the problem of evil, which relies upon free will to explain the existence of evil in the world. However, if we are free, we must question whether the idea of God's omniscience makes any sense. The reason for this is that if God knows everything, this requires the future to be laid out. If it is laid out already, then that implies that we are not free. If we are free, then God should not already know what we will do in the future. In addition, there are implications for God's power. If God is omnipotent, then he should have power over everything. However, if we are free, that suggests that at least some power lies with us. If we are morally responsible for our behaviour, that suggests that the power to send us to heaven or hell lies with us rather than God, so he cannot have absolute power.